Welcome back, fellow aircraft builders and aviation enthusiasts. Today's video is going to be about forming the mixer bearing support, and when I shot the footage for all of this, somehow my audio didn't record. I'm actually wearing my lavalier mic in the footage here, but for some reason it did not record properly. So we're going to do this narration style. So you saw a moment ago that my part blank was in the bending brake already, and this is the drawing for the mixer bearing support. The part is made out of 63 thousandths, so it's rather thick because it is a bracket, and you can see it's got some complex bends and things like that in it, but essentially it's just a hat section. Now the reason those flanges are at a weird angle is because this thing bolts to the side of the inside of the fuselage as it tapers back to the tail, but the bore axis of the hole for where your mixer tube goes through has to be perpendicular to the longitudinal axis of the airplane, if that makes sense. So if you can imagine a control tube running kind of down the center of that hole, or through that hole, you can see why it would need to be perpendicular to the longitudinal axis of the airplane. So one of the things I'm kind of pointing out here in the video is that these measurements don't really show reference points in regard to the thickness of the material, but that 20 millimeter flange, for example, includes the 63 thousandths thickness of that 30 millimeter leg, and then so on and so forth through the rest of the bends. So it's a little difficult to bend on a standard bending brake. It's better to be done on the press brake, but I'm going to use a combination of hammer forming and bending brake to bend this. So that's the measurements there for my two 20 millimeter legs, and I think that those were measured 17 millimeters inboard from the outside of the part, and then you flip it over and you can see where the mixer bearing hole is, as well as the bend lines for to form the hat section of that channel. So we're gonna bend the 20 millimeter flanges first and confirm those angles. You can see here I've got it in the bending brake, and it's clamped down quite hard because even though that's a short section, it's rather difficult to bend. But none of these flanges are at 90 degrees because of the angle that they have to mate up to the side of the fuselage. So what I've done is bent it as best I can in the bending brake, and I'm going to pop it out here and confirm the angle. And you have to tease them into position a little bit. The angle, particularly with my bending brake, it's really hard to get the bending angle 100% right the first time through. So I'm going to grab my protractor here and measure the angle, and then I'm going to kind of work that flange into proper position with the half a degree or so that it's off. And I can't remember, but I think that's the closed angle. So I'm trying to find a spot here on the bending brake that's a little tighter so I can get it in there and kind of bend that flange out just a little bit, and you'll see. Anyway, so I did that, and now the angle is the proper, I think it's 83 degrees, although it depends on which side you measure it from, but you'll see with the protractor here that it's at the right angle after teasing that flange into position. The nice thing about these shorter sections is that it's pretty easy to manually tweak those angles. So now I have to bend the other side up, and fortunately this part is long enough or wide enough to fit completely through my bending brake with the other side sticking out the back. But you can see I'm taking a confirmation measurement here that flange is indeed 20 millimeters from the outside edge of where that hat section is going to form. Although I'm not holding the scale very well here, but that's 20 millimeters overall length, including the thickness of the riser there. So I'm going to insert this from the back of the brake and kind of tap it into position. Again, this section is just barely wide enough to be able to do this. You can see right there the edge of the bending brake is separating. The bending leaf, or excuse me, the clamping leaf is just curling up under the strain of this material. That's how hard it is to bend, even that small section. So it slipped on me a little bit, so I stopped bending it, and I'm tapping it back into position, and I'm going to ratchet down my clamping bar and add a little tension to that kind of rigged up truss that I have. And this just illustrates really how poorly designed this brake really is. But a little more tension on there, and that bend already having been started, I can finish that bend off. And then again, had to kind of manually tease that angle to get it to the proper degree with the protractor. But the issue now is that the section of that channel that I've just bent is trapped inside the brake, and I have to take this clamping bolt all the way out so I can slide the part out from underneath it. Depending on the style of brake that you have, you may still have to do that. Some of the DIY brakes out there would still require a step similar to this. But the relatively few parts that you have to make like this, it's inconvenient, but it's not like you're doing this all the time. This only happens with a few parts. But anyway, I'm taking some confirmation measurements. I think that one actually turned out properly without me having to adjust the angle on it manually. But so now you can see you've got weird angles there on those flanges that pop out. They're both 20 millimeters wide, and they look kind of strange, but those are the right measurements for that. Now we have to bend it from the other direction to give us the hat channel that we need for the finished part. So I'm going to put this in the bench vise and show you how I did this by hammer forming it manually. So when I revised my bending brake, I had to cut a little section of my bending nose off, and that gave me a wood block with a 1/4 inch radius and an 1/8 inch radius. You can see there I've got the wrong radius in there. This part actually gets formed to 1/8 inch radius, even though it's 63 thousandths thick. So if you use this method, make sure that you're hammer forming around the correct radius. And then basically I have to use at least one side of the bench vise has to have soft jaws on it to clamp the aluminum, and then the other one can be the regular metal jaws. But you run the risk with soft jaws of the part slipping, so it's kind of a delicate trick to get that to hold tight enough in there that you can hammer form this without too much problem. And you can see the lower part of that channel. I already bent that one side of it just to make sure that I could do it before I started filming it, but it worked out just fine. But you can see now, because that channel is bent in there, I need extra space between the jaws so that I'm not grinding up against that formed side. So I've had to add a second soft jaw in there, which I'm not real thrilled about, to be able to give me some clearance. But the difficult part here really is just lining up the bend line with the radius block in there. It takes a little while to get that into position so that you're going to bend it along the proper bend line. And actually another set of hands would have helped immensely on this, because you're juggling a bunch of different loose parts and trying to make sure everything's perfect. And I think I have a little bit of tension on that so that it kind of holds it pretty well without my hand being in there. But once you've got the bend line lined up with the forming radius there, you really want to crank it down so that this part does not slip. And again, because there's two soft jaws in there, it's much more likely to slip than if this was being held in place by the metal ones. But that's, make do with what you have. I suppose I could have put some wooden blocks in there instead of the soft jaws, but the soft jaws are made to stay in place, which is nice. I don't have to fidget with those. So the method I use to form the other side of the channel, and then of course this method for this side of the channel, is just simply a thin wooden block that stays outside of the bent radius of the original flange bends. If you were to put something up into there, you would change the angle as you're hammering of the flanged bend line that you've already ensured was properly bent. So you want to kind of stay out of that radius and hammer on a flat section of the material here. So what I'm doing is just every time I take the hammer off there, I'm kind of confirming where I'm ending up. Now the nice thing about these sides are that they are 90 degrees to the top of the section. So it's a lot easier to eyeball these into position. And I'm just, ever progressively hammering a little further and a little further until I get that whole piece into position. And you have to hammer kind of like when you're forming ribs and things like that. You kind of have to hammer along the length of it. If you hammer in one spot, you'll end up with it overbent, and right there the edge of it is a little overbent. So I'm back there on the other side trying to draw that down to 90 degrees. So that's pretty much it to form this. I'll take it out of the vise here and then kind of confirm how it turned out. And again, there you see me bending it apart. I'm basically just teasing those parts back into the position that I need them to be. So again, those final bends are 90 degrees to the top surface of the channel. That one side over there is a little overbent and it's a little twisted. So I'm kind of twisting it back into position to try to get those bends to be exactly 90 degrees. I'll show you in a second here that the whole part itself is actually twisted a little bit lengthwise, but you can twist that back into position a little bit. So that's the formed part, and you can see those flanges, they need to lay flat. That would basically be the inside of the fuselage as it tapers back to the tail. That's what that's going to bolt to. And so the flanges need to lay flat relative to each other. You can see there the inside hole. I will pilot it from that side, and then I will drill the final side from the other side of the material so that I don't have any obstructions with the hole saw or the hole cutter, circle cutter. But I'll have to shim up the low side to be able to do that so that the hole itself is perpendicular to the material. So here we're just kind of confirming the measurements again. 20 millimeter flanges. I think the each flange is 20 millimeters, and then if I recall correctly, the lengths of those legs are 37 and 30 millimeters, and then the part is 55 millimeters wide. Again, that includes the thickness of the material from end to end. So you want the very top of that section there to be 30 millimeters all the way down to the bottom of the flange. And I think we're really close there. I think it might be a half a millimeter off on that side, and I think the other side is pretty much perfect. And then we'll confirm the width of the part is, I think it's supposed to be 55 or 56. I have to check the drawings, but that's what I'm doing in the video. Lots of rechecking measurements just to make sure that this part was formed correctly. And now here you can see the twist along the length of the material. The flanges themselves are pretty close to perfect all the way down the length of them, but the twist is what's causing the problem. So you can kind of see it right there. You can see that part is just a little bit twisted. And so I'll manually just take the twist out of that with my hands, or I'll put it back in the bench vise and twist it back into position. But once you do that, then the part itself is basically perfect. So sorry about the audio problem here, but that's essentially how you make a part like that. That's all for this video. Be sure to like, comment, or subscribe, and let me know if you have any requests for future video content. As always, thanks for watching, and good luck with your projects.